Well, hello, everybody. We've got a minute or so before we officially get started, but I'm so glad you've joined me. This is my first YouTube Live. So, those of you who are here, thank you and give me a little grace on technology. But hopefully, we're off to a good start. Good to see some of you. Love that some of you are going ahead and putting in the chat where you're from. It's always fun to see where everybody's coming in from, especially on a Friday morning. Friday morning, at least for me, depends on where you are in the world. And we'll get started here in just a few seconds. I'm excited about this. We'll give a few more people a chance to hop on. Good. Janaea from our team is on. She's one of our coaches here at the Foresight Group and also functions as our executive director, helping make everything happen. We'll have several of our Foresight team members in the chat, so they'll introduce themselves, and you can always comment or ask questions, and they will help address those as well. All right, we've got friends from Texas, Oklahoma, Florida, Wisconsin, always representing. Love it. Seattle, so good. Nebraska, great to see you all this morning. Well, I'm Jenni Catron. I lead a company called the Foresight Group, and we help cultivate healthy leaders to lead thriving teams. I am all about helping leaders lead well and build great teams so you can actually accomplish the mission that you feel called to. And so that is what wakes me up every day, keeps me motivated. My team and I get to work with leaders all across, mostly the US, a little bit in Canada, a lot around the world via online work. But we love serving leaders, and we love helping leaders build cultures that attract and retain the best talent. And so that's why I'm excited to jump on today and walk you through my observations from Gallup's State of the Workplace report that just came out this week. It's kind of like Christmas for organizational culture nerds like me when the State of the Workplace report comes out, because you have so many things as a leader. When I'm working with clients, there's so many things that I'm observing about organizational culture that I'm hearing. And so it's always fun to see Gallup's research, because obviously they are the gurus on the research in this area. And it's always so good to hear what their findings are from the previous year. And I thought this would be fun to kind of hop on with a bunch of friends and share my thoughts and observations around what I see in the report and what I think it means for us as leaders. So that's my goal today, is to just really pretend we were sitting down over a cup of tea and we were talking about this report together. I wish it was a little bit more of a two-way street, but I am trying to pay attention to the chat. So feel free to add your comments or observations. In fact, I'd love for you to mention in the chat whether you've seen the report at all, or if you're like, nope, coming in blind, Jenni. I mean, it literally just came out a couple days ago. So are there any other junkies out there, culture champions, who have already read through the report, or are you here like saying, no, Jenni, we want you to give us the Cliff Notes, walking in blind? Thank you for the person who says, you know what, I'm coming in blind. Haven't read it. One of you has read it. Great. And no shame. Like, this is what I do for a living. Like, I love digging into this stuff. And then I love being able to help kind of synthesize some of the observations to just help equip you as a leader, put it into practice in your workplace. So we'll talk a little bit about, there's some interesting things. They start talking about AI in this year's report a little more intentionally and looking at engagement related to that. So I'm going to draw a few conclusions on that. The continued decline in employee engagement. It's not such good news. It's not the worst, but it's definitely not going the right direction. The growing manager effectiveness gap. This, you guys, my team and I are seeing over and over and over again, this gap in manager effectiveness. And so I'm going to really zero in on that. Employee well-being, what's driving burnout, stress, et cetera, and how the workplace impacts that, and what we can do as leaders. Because I think the best part about this kind of data is a tool, right? Data is a tool that gives us good information to know, hey, here's maybe where I need to be more curious. Here's where I need to take action. Here's where I need to be a bit more proactive. So that's why I love this kind of information, because it just starts pointing me in the right direction, right? Like, I have instincts or insights as a leader, but they're from my bias, they're from my perspective and from the lens that I see things from. And so when I can actually get good information that helps me get a broader perspective on what's happening in the workplace, it helps me be more curious and kind of starts pointing me in the right direction of where I need to take action. So I love that we have a mix of people who, some of you have read it, some of you have not read it yet. That's great. Those that you have read it, it'll be fun as I'm commenting and sharing some of my observations. I'd love to hear, plug into the chat maybe some of the observations that you had or things that stood out to you too. So this was not overly programmed, simply because it did just come out. And so I'm like digesting it in real time, but I've synthesized some of my observations in a few categories. And I'm going to use that as the Kickstarter today. And hopefully you find some value in it as well. So I mentioned earlier, I am a self-proclaimed culture champion, culture junkie. Like, I love organizational culture, and because of the dynamics it creates and how it brings out the best in people when it's done well. And so, short story for me is, my first work experience was phenomenal. Then we went through a corporate merger, and I felt like it changed drastically overnight. And what had changed was my leader, my team, and the environment. Essentially, the culture had changed, and my engagement plummeted. So my passion for this work is because I experienced it firsthand. I went from being a very highly engaged, thriving team member to somebody who was phoning it in, doing the bare minimum, quiet quitting before it was even really a thing, because of the impact of organizational culture. And that's why this information, I think, is so incredibly valuable to us as leaders, because what we also know is that when employees are engaged, when cultures are strong and healthy, productivity goes up, profitability goes up, retention goes up, turnover goes down. Like, all the metrics go the right direction when cultures are healthy and thriving. And if there's anything I'm able to accomplish in the world in my lifetime, it's to help these numbers go the right direction, because the work that we're doing, the things that we're trying to accomplish, they all actually hinge on effective, engaged employees and strong cultures. And yet, many times it's a thing that gets put on the back burner of our priorities. And I want to get it on the front burner of every leader's priority list, because I deeply believe that when culture is strong and healthy, when team members are engaged, everything else goes the right direction. So if you're a fellow culture champion, will you put that in the chat for me? Say, I'm a culture champion. Just put culture champion in there. I'm a culture champion. I'm looking for my fellow culture champions, because we got to help keep banging the drum on the importance of this work. Oh yeah, CC. That's great. That's perfect. All right, let's start by looking at the data specific to AI impact. I thought this was interesting because in the report, right off the bat, they talk about AI. And I didn't go back and look at previous reports, but this is the first one I remember. Like, they really put an emphasis on AI, and it makes sense because it is. I don't know about you all, but you can't turn without somebody telling you the newest tool that you need to be using and what AI thing is revolutionizing their life. And it is upending our work. It is a fascinating, I was thinking about this morning, because what an interesting and amazing time to be living, right? The space shuttle is just about to land again today after its furthest venture ever. And then we have this AI technology that is just like transforming everything. And it's a little unnerving. Like, if you're honest as a leader, it's a little unnerving because you're like, I can't even keep up with this, let alone lead through this. But when we get away, when we pull back from some of those fears and we look at the opportunity, it's such a fascinating time to be alive and to be leading. And so it is interesting to me that the report starts out with AI impact. So listen to this. Here's some interesting things. Despite 40 billion, that's a B, in investment, 95% of organizations have seen zero measurable impact on profit. This is related to AI. So this I found really interesting. Now, this is in 2025, which I think is also really fascinating because this report was from 2025. So they're giving us the data from 2025. So they said 40 billion was invested in AI in companies that were beginning to adopt it, but 95% of those organizations saw like zero measurable impact on profit. So they're not seeing an impact on profit yet. And then it said only 12% of employees in AI implemented organizations. So they're talking about specifically organizations that have implemented AI. Only 20% of them strongly agree that AI has transformed how work gets done. So right now, even with some of the fears of, is AI going to take my job? We are hearing some stories of downsizing and right sizing because of AI, but yet we're not seeing a direct line to profitability. Um, I think like I think this is changing so rapidly that I think even after Q1 of 2026, I think this data probably looks different, but that's pure speculation on my part. But it's interesting that at 2025 data is saying, hey, we're not seeing measurable impact on that yet. I think this year we will see massive movement on that. And so I think this is also why we need to be paying attention to it as leaders, because here's what they were saying why it's not working. Like, why, if we've got all this technology and we're investing all of this money into AI adoption, why is it not working? The common theme was managers. That managers were really key to AI adoption. If managers weren't helping lead through it, then it's not getting traction. And we'll come back to that a little bit later because that's one of the things. And really, for the last several years, if not more than that, in the Gallup research, it keeps coming back to the manager. In fact, Gallup wrote a book called It's the Manager several years ago. And but this is because continuing to be a standout, and I'll come back to that. But I thought it was interesting that right off the bat, the employee engagement stuff, they are zeroing in on AI because we all feel it and we know it and we see it. I just did a training inside our network. We have something called the Lead Culture Network. We'll tell you more about later. But we have a network for culture champions to connect. And I did a training last week on AI and how we need to be leading through it. And I think we've got to be paying attention to this because while we're not seeing in the data from 2025 the impact on productivity and profitability and so forth, I think that's going to change, and I think it's going to change really quickly. So I would just say that's one I'd stay curious about. But let's dig into the one that is probably the topic that gets my best energy is employee engagement. And that's the big piece that the Gallup research is really looking at is employee engagement, which let me give you a definition of employee engagement. Employee engagement measures the psychological attachment that workers have to their work, to their team, and to their employer. And this is from Gallup. So I'm quoting lots of their stuff today. So when in doubt, most of what I'm saying today, you can credit to Gallup. Employee engagement measures the psychological attachment workers have to their work, their team, and their employer. So in other words, employee engagement is about loyalty and a sense of belonging. That's big, you guys. That employee engagement, when we talk about employee engagement scores, we're not just talking about them just being warm, fuzzy, happy. We're talking about their commitment, their attachment to their work, to their team, to their employer. And again, when I think back to that first work experience that I had, where my first years at that company were amazing, and then we went through the merger and it was awful, my attachment to my team, my work, and my employer were very different in those two scenarios. And so it impacts that employee's loyalty, their sense of belonging. Do I fit here? Is this the place for me? Are these my people? That's what we're talking about when we talk about employee engagement. It doesn't mean we're not challenged or we're not being stretched or we're not growing or we're not uncomfortable sometimes, but it means I have a deep loyalty, a deep commitment and attachment to this work, to this place, to this team, because I have some sense of purpose, meaning belonging in it. And I think that's a core need that we have as humans in general. And I think we need to pay attention to that, especially when we look at these numbers. Globally, employee engagement declined again. Not great news, right? Globally, employee engagement declined again. It's down to 20%. Only 20% of workers across the globe are engaged in their work. Like, guys, that is tragic to me because we spend the better part of our days at work, away from our families, away from the other parts of our life that we love. And we are not thriving there. Now, the good news is that the US number, because again, we're primarily serving US and Canada, these are US and Canada numbers. That number is 31%. Now, it stayed flat from last year. It was 31% last year, it's 31% this year. Only 31% of US and Canadian workers are engaged in their work. Guys, that's less than 1 in 3 of your team. Less than 1 in 3 of your team are engaged in their work. And that should get our attention. Now, this might not be true of you, but it's something to pay attention to. Something to pay attention to of don't just quickly dismiss it. See, that's the tendency, right? You're like, oh, that's not true at our organization. Well, I bet you if I talked to 10 organizations, 9 out of the 10 would tell me that's not true. Well, that stat doesn't bear out, right? If 31% of US employees are not engaged in their work, let's pay attention, let's perk up so we can try to see what's true about that in our organization. Why does this matter? I've hit on this a little bit, but why I think this is a statistic that we need to not just brush over, but we need to like internalize a little bit is first, personally, it's about our fulfillment, our well being, our sense of purpose. Like if we're engaged, that sense of I am doing something meaningful that matters, like that impacts everything else about how we look at life, how we think about our own sense of legacy. And so for every person personally, there's just that sense of fulfillment, well-being, purpose that's really important. Corporately, if you're the leader of a team, of an organization, et cetera, it impacts all the other metrics, like I mentioned a minute ago. Profitability goes up, productivity goes up, retention goes up. And here's another interesting thing that the Gallup data identified is that when engagement is up, there's a greater readiness for change. Now, you know this. If you've led change management on anything in your organization, if you have an engaged team, they come with you, right? Like they're like, this is hard, this is difficult, but we all lean in and we go through change together. If you don't have an engaged team, if you have disengaged or passive employees, when you try to lead change, I mean, they are like brakes are on. They are resistant at every turn. And y'all know what I'm talking about because you've been in organizations like that or you've led in seasons like that. And you're like, that is miserable. When people aren't engaged and they aren't committed, even though we're having to do something hard, like unexpected change, unexpected resistance. I'll never forget, I read some of Patrick Lencioni's work years ago when I was leading in an organization. And he talked about his thematic goal, or he talked about the importance of creating a crisis, which in other words, create your thematic goal before a crisis hits you. Give your team a rallying cry, because when you quickly find out what your team is made of when they face crisis. You quickly find out whether you have an engaged team or a disengaged team. And my caution to you is, hey, don't wait for a crisis. Don't wait for change to be thrust upon you. Like, make sure your team is engaged, because if they're engaged, then they will weather the crisis with you. So the Gallup research does point out the readiness for change. And then, of course, because AI is a theme in this one, they say that AI is a major disruption. This is a quote from the report. AI is a major disruption. So organizations with engaged employees tend to navigate disruptions more successfully. So just kind of restating what I just said. But essentially, AI is coming to disrupt your organization. Guys, it is going to happen. I don't know to what level for your organization, but it is disrupting everything. And so the more engaged your team is, the more they're able to help like weather that change together. And so this, again, reason why we want to lean into helping create engaged and thriving teams, because the headwinds are always coming. There's always something coming. Y'all have been around long enough as leaders to know that. But leading through that change, that readiness for change, the greater engagement we have, the more they will walk through that change with us together. Now, let's come back to manager engagement, or let's actually go into manager engagement. I've hit on managers a couple of times, and then there's some research around manager level engagement and then how that impacts employee engagement. So lower engagement among managers accounts for most of the recent downturn in employee engagement. So they're seeing a direct correlation between how engaged your managers are and how then engaged the rest of your team is. So lower engagement among managers accounts for most of the recent downturn in employee engagement. Here's like the not great news. Since 2022, manager engagement has dropped by 9 points. Manager engagement has dropped by 9 points. People don't love management. Have y'all seen this? That you have somebody in mind that you want to promote and they're like, "Yeah, I don't know if I want to get promoted to management. Like I don't know if I want that hassle." Like when I was younger, like you were clamoring for that next rung on the ladder. That has shifted. And if some of you have seen this, like, say yes in the chat, right? Because we are noticing this frequently that people are a little less interested in management responsibility because they kind of just see that it's just a load and a responsibility, and they're not sure that they're interested in it. So, but that lower management engagement is impacting everybody else's engagement. So goes the leader, so goes the team. So our managers are continuing to become a really critical pinch point in engagement overall, both for themselves and then for everybody else. Gallup found that here's the good news. Here's the opportunity. Here's the opportunity. Within best practice organizations, so organizations that are really leaning into best practices around culture and so forth, 79% of managers were engaged at work. So that went from, in the US, 36% of managers are engaged. 79% of managers were engaged at work in best practices organizations. And so when we commit to the work of healthy culture, when we commit to creating environments that we're intentional about helping people thrive and focusing on increasing engagement, when that manager engagement, when that manager engagement is significantly up, it impacts everything else. So I'm also curious, and I haven't deep dived into this level of the data, but I'm curious about the disparity. I suspect there's a lot of organizations that, best practice organizations with really highly engaged managers and highly engaged staff. And then I think you have others on the other end of the spectrum. Just a speculation from me. But the opportunity is if we can get our managers engaged, everybody else is engaged. Now, specific to AI, because they're tying everything to AI this year. The two top drivers of AI use in organizations are first systems, right? Do we have good systems and policies around our AI use, which I would highly encourage. But then secondly, manager-led AI adoption. So again, it's coming back to the manager. Many employees report a lack of active support from their managers. Reported a lack of active support from their managers. And so therefore, they're maybe unsure of how to use AI. They're unsure of whether they should use AI. So they're lacking support from their managers, which is inhibiting AI adoption. Effective people management is a skill. We all know that, right? But few managers have natural management talent, and many haven't received the training that they need. And so this is the thing I really want you. It's one of the key takeaways I'm going to encourage you to process from our discussion today is how well equipped are your managers? Because they are really becoming that linchpin to employee engagement across the board. And of course, the AI adoption is a key component of that, but it's really everything, right? When our managers are strong, healthy, and thriving, they have significant impact across the organization. And so if you're looking at maybe some of your priorities for this year, especially around organizational health, culture, employee engagement, start with your managers. Start with your managers and getting a really good assessment of how are they, what do they need, what training do they need, how do they need to be equipped, because people management is a skill. And many times we promote people into the responsibility of management without giving them the skill of management. And that's a recipe for disaster. I have been there and been that employee who was underdeveloped and thrown into management responsibility and had to do a lot of cleanup and a lot of work to grow and develop as a leader and as a manager. So managers, key to overall engagement. Now, let's look at another. This was an interesting one, and I have some thoughts on this one. Another section of the report talks about the perception of the job market. Perception of the job market. So how do people feel about their ability to get a job in today's market? And again, this was 2025. So isn't it fascinating how, because things are moving so fast, we're one quarter into 2026, and I already feel like this data might be out of date, because the perception of the job market in 2025 improved by 1 percentage point from the year prior. So it actually improved, which surprised me given current state. I thought, oh, perception of job market is probably not going to be great. Surprisingly, it improved by 1 percentage point. But here's an interesting thing too. It dropped for fully remote workers. So I know that we're starting to see kind of a balancing out of more hybrid work. There's less fully remote options, but I think we're also seeing the impact on individuals, and it shows up in some of the deeper data that fully remote workers seem to be suffering the most. Now, that's not a direct quote from Gallup. That's an observation from me of looking at some of it, but especially related to the perception of the job market, fully remote workers dropped. They're the ones that dropped. Everything else improved by 1 percentage point. And I think there's a bigger concern on the perception of the job market, because I think what's not captured here, because I think maybe in the last quarter or so, this has become a growing conversation, but how AI is impacting jobs. I think there's a lot more fear around, will AI take my job? And I don't know how much that really was and this is just Jenni's thoughts on this. I don't know how much that was a big concern throughout most of 2025, but I think that's a growing concern. So I think the perception of the job market has already shifted, even though the data from 2025 says, we actually improved. I think there's a bigger concern because things are changing so fast, especially related to AI and how AI will impact things. So I think that's a place to stay curious as leaders, is to just know that I don't know that their perception of the job market is as strong as it might have looked. Again, just my speculation on that. Okay, I want to look quickly I want to see how I'm doing on time. Okay, good. Another key area of the report is employee well-being. And here's good news. This was some of the best news in the report, that employee well-being improved for the first time in 3 years. Employee well-being improved for the first time in 3 years. That's really good news. I'm very curious about that stat and maybe what's behind it. Well-being, this is a quote from the data, well-being increases when employees see their work as intrinsically rewarding and good for others. And so this is really interesting when we talk about, well, what does well-being mean? The way they would describe well-being is it's meaningful work, like you're doing meaningful work. When you have a sense of you're doing it for others, you're serving others through that work, and you have choices in what you do. Like there's a sense of agency, right? So those three things, meaningful work, you're serving other people doing it, and you have some choices, you have some agency in it, contributes to an employee's sense of well-being. And so I think that's, again, something for us to pay attention to as we're looking at our teams. Do they feel like they have meaningful work? Like sometimes we have to remind them and connect the dots to how what they're doing impacts or has an impact. That serving others piece, I think in some ways we just continue to get a little more selfish and self-focused and self-protective. And I think if we can help create environments and climates where people really do want to pitch in and support each other and help one another, and they see how they're serving others on the other side of that, like if we can get back to a servant leadership mentality. And then, of course, we still want them to have some sense of influence, some sense of agency, some choice in what they're doing. So feedback, input, influence in the organization is really, really valuable. So those are things to pay attention to for employee well-being, right? Of like, do they have meaningful work? Are they doing that on the behalf of others? And do they feel like they have influence and choices in what they're doing and how they're doing it? If you can create an environment where those ingredients exist, you're going to help create an environment where their well-being is stronger. Here's a quote from Gallup. Leaders have so this is interesting, super interesting, because this is where we start to see some of the disparity in leadership and the rest of the organization. Leaders have higher life evaluations or sense of well-being but worse days than those they lead. So let me say that again. This is really, really interesting data. Leaders overall, like, so they're talking about, like, they categorize it leaders, managers, and employees. Like, I think it's those three categories in the results. So leaders have, so highest leaders in the organization have higher life evaluation, so higher sense of well-being, but worse days than those they lead. So they're going to have really hard days, but they overall have a higher level of um, satisfaction, so to speak. Here's my thoughts on why I think that is. I think that when you lead at that level, when you have that level of responsibility, right, there's more purpose and meaning. And so I think there's an interesting thing to pay attention to here, in that, people's resistance to more management responsibilities. I think in that resistance of more of the responsibility, they're also shortchanging themselves on the meaning and purpose that can come from that responsibility. That's just totally Jenni's evaluation on that. But I think when we're at higher levels of responsibility in the organization, we often might find more meaning and purpose in it, because it's not just about us and our job, but we actually have responsibility for a whole team or a whole organization. Here's another quote from Gallup. Engagement reduces the emotional burden of leading others and significantly boosts thriving. So if you are highly engaged, it reduces, that level of engagement reduces the emotional burden of leading others and significantly boosts thriving. This, you guys, is fascinating to me. The more engaged we are, the more the emotional burden lifts. It's counterintuitive, isn't it? But I've seen it. I've experienced it, right? Well, the more engaged I am, the more resilience I feel like I have for the emotional burden of leadership. And I'm thriving more, right? And so I think, again, all the more reason why making sure we're at a place where we're engaged, we're deeply engaged in meaningful work. But it also, it gives us more resilience for that emotional burden, and significantly boosts how much we're thriving in the organization. Gallup finds that when managers, including leaders, are engaged, they report experiencing all the negative emotions at lower rates. So Gallup evaluates some negative emotions, and I'll talk about that here in a minute. They find that when managers, including leaders, are engaged, they report experiencing all negative emotions at lower rates than individual contributors. They are also 14 points more likely to be thriving in their overall life than the average leader. So the more engaged we are, the more all of those factors, like the negative emotions, go down. Our thriving level goes way up. Super fascinating. I encourage you. You can go download this report. It's free from Gallup, but it's super fascinating information, and it's a great litmus test for yourself to just go, okay, what's my engagement level? What's my emotional burden level feel like? Am I thriving? And then why not? And being able to kind of, because I think sometimes when we feel the emotional burden, or we feel we're not thriving, we pull back more, we disengage more, which is actually the opposite of what we should be doing. And guys, this is just a quick plug. This is why culture, this is why culture matters so much. And this is also why the culture in our organization might not be as good as we think. So if you're one of those leaders that's highly engaged, you're thriving, you're committed, you're feeling great, but you're struggling to understand why others are not, this might be why. It shows that leaders, the higher leadership levels, the more engaged they are, they're not feeling the same impact as the rest of the organization. So just a really, really fascinating stat that might show why there's a discrepancy between what our experience is as leaders and what the rest of the team is experiencing. Okay, I'm going to wrap this up in just a few minutes. But I want to hit just some of the some of the US and Canada specific data, just a few highlights of some things that stood out to me. Life evaluation. So 51% of US and Canadian workers are thriving, but guys, 45% are struggling. 45% are struggling. That's a big number. Like, it's great that the majority are thriving, but 45 that are still struggling really just goes, okay, what is that? What does that mean? What do we need to do about it as leaders? So that would be one that I would say, hey, get curious and dig in on that one. Here's another thing that was interesting to me. So I'm just giving you some of the things that stood out and were kind of interesting to me. In employee engagement, age did not appear to be a factor in this, which I thought was very fascinating, right? Because they have one part of their data looks at age. 31% of people less than 35 years old were engaged. 31% over the age of 35 were engaged. So the number was the same, whether you're under 35 or over 35. Age did not appear to be a factor of engagement, which I thought was very interesting because sometimes we want to blame the younger generation on not being engaged, and the data doesn't say that. What was interesting, and I mentioned earlier, is that engagement is higher for managers than it is for individual contributors, and yet the manager engagement score went down significantly. Remember, 9 points in the last few years. So managers are still more engaged than individual contributors. But they impact that, right? So the less engaged managers are, the less engaged individual contributors are. And that manager engagement score has been going down consistently. On the thriving, I remember I talked about that thriving versus struggling. So 51% are thriving, 45% are struggling. Managers are thriving much more than individual contributors are. But again, there's that cascading effect, right? So the less they're thriving, the less the team is thriving. That was where we saw this most significant difference. Although in the age bracket on this one, 47% of those less than 35 years old were thriving, but 53% of those older than 35 were thriving. So our friends that are more than 35 are thriving more than our younger leaders are. Daily stress. This one's interesting. Daily stress. Massive difference in gender. Females are experiencing daily stress at 55%, males at 45%. So your females on your team are experiencing more stress than your guys are. That's something to pay attention to. And your younger leaders are experiencing more stress than your older leaders. 59% of those under 35 are experiencing daily stress. Only 46% of those over 35. Well, that's a lot of stress either way you talk about it. But those were the two really standouts, is females are feeling more daily stress and younger people under 35 are feeling more daily stress. Okay, sadness. Daily sadness. Did you experience the following feelings a lot of the day yesterday? And they're talking about sadness specifically. Females, much higher rate of sadness than males. Younger leaders, more than older leaders. So same pattern there. And loneliness. Younger leaders are feeling more lonely. I think this also is an impact of remote or hybrid work, that they're not in the office and getting that connection and camaraderie and mentoring that naturally happens in an office environment. And that's something as leaders we really need to be paying attention to. If you've been in the workplace for a decade or more, you've built relationships, you've built connections, you've built your networks. And so you don't feel the need for it quite as much. But I'm seeing this a lot, that younger leaders, that level of loneliness, the lack of connection is becoming a big factor for them. And yes, that was just some of my observations from the report. Sorry that I'm totally just giving you the brief of, hey, here's what I see, and here's what I'm paying attention to. So here's the question for us, right? What do we do with this? I mentioned this earlier, but I would just say get curious, right? Get curious about this data. If something stood out to you from today, and in fact, plug it into the chat. What stood out to you in the data? What kind of piqued your curiosity to go, I need to know more about that? What stood out, and ask more questions. So maybe go get the report, dig into it in more detail, ask more questions, meet with your team, get some insights that help you understand that data even more. Secondly, I would say equip your managers. It is clear, and it shows up every year, that equipping your managers is really, really important. And so I would encourage you to take some time to really evaluate what skills do your people managers need to lead well. Look at performance reviews, look at exit interviews. In my book, Culture Matters, if y'all haven't gotten this, this is my USA Today best-selling book, Culture Matters, and I walk you through an entire framework to help you build a healthy and thriving culture. One of the chapters in there, actually two of the chapters in there, are all about equipping leaders, and I have 8 skills that every leader needs to lead well. And there's actually just quick assessments that you can do to help evaluate your leaders on those 8 competencies or 8 skills that are really critical for leaders. So make sure you dig into what can we do to equip our managers. And you guys, this doesn't have to be complicated. I think sometimes we wait to do training or development for our managers until we can create this great, robust program. You know what? Pick a resource and have them read it and then do a lunch to talk about it. Could be a podcast you have them listen to, could be a book that you have them read, could be an article that they read, could be a YouTube video you have them watch, but give them a resource. And once a month, do a manager training and you're just talking about it and learning about it. Or pick some of your great managers in your organization, pick a skill that they're great at and have them teach everybody else, right? Don't overcomplicate it, just start doing things, because as you start creating a rhythm of training and development for your managers, you will see their engagement increase, okay? So equip your managers, really, really double down on that. And then commit to creating a thriving culture, right? Engagement isn't just created from a one-time event or a offsite fun day or free lunch or whatever the case might be. Engagement is created by creating an environment where people are doing meaningful work. They are committed and engaged with their team, with their leader, with the work that they're doing. And that happens when we give them the clarity and the equipping that they need to succeed. And so Culture Matters outlines a framework called the Lead Culture Framework, where we walk you through a 5-phase process to actually build a culture operating system. A culture operating system that guarantees engagement. You guys, we get to do this with organizations of all sizes, and we see impact year over year. We have not had a client work with us that their employee engagement did not go up after doing the work, after engaging the framework. And so I want to encourage you. This is the kind of thing we keep putting on the back burner and say, we'll get to it, we'll get to it, we'll get to it. Well, the data points out that engaged employees radically impact everything else in our organization. And so I just want to encourage you, this is the year to double down on building a environment where employees can thrive, where they are engaged, and our framework will help you do that. So my team will put a link in the chat to our website and even to book a discovery call with us to just learn more about the work that we do and how we do it. We'd love to have a conversation to help equip you to build a place where team members are thriving and engaged. That's what it's all about. And then I lost my notes. We also have a network called the Lead Culture Network. I mentioned that earlier. And so if you're somebody who wakes up every day thinking about how can I keep people engaged? How can I create a thriving culture for our team? The network is an easy and quick place to jump in. We do live exclusive trainings in the network. You have access to all of our course material. We have a whole course on the framework, the Lead Culture Framework, where you can self-guide yourself through it and just get connected with other culture champions who wake up thinking about this every day. And so we've put a link in the chat as well for our network, which is just a great way to connect. But here is my encouragement to you. Engagement matters. You know that it matters for you, right? You know that waking up and loving what you're doing is a game changer in every dimension of life. Like, it impacts everything else, doesn't it? If you love your work, if you love doing what you do, the overflow of that is positive in the other dimensions of your life. And the opposite is true. If you're not engaged, if you're not thriving, the ripple effect of that to the other dimensions of your life is also impactful and usually not good. Guys, we want to create teams that are engaged and are thriving, love their work, love what they're doing. Doesn't mean we love it every day, by the way, because some days are just hard. Some days we have to lean in, sometimes, but remember that resilience that gets created when we're engaged, like it equips us to weather the storm. And so I just want to encourage you, this is possible. That's why we do the work that we do. That's why I've written the book. We've built the framework because we really do believe that if leaders will make this a priority. Now, you've got your other myriad of things going on, and we understand that. We actually help you build an operating system that runs parallel to everything else you're doing. Like we build it into everything else you're doing so that you're creating an environment where people are bumping into the best of who you are as an organization and then able to thrive inside of that. So, if that piques your curiosity, reach out to us. We'll do a discovery call. We'll tell you what we do and how we do it, and help you look at what's the next right step for you to create a place where employees are engaged and thriving. And as a result, you're seeing the profitability, the productivity, and the impact towards achieving your mission that you actually want. That's the bottom line, right? And so, guys, thank you for joining me today. Thanks for caring about this work and for giving a little extra time on your Friday morning to the conversation. I hope it was helpful. I hope it kind of sparked some ideas for you. And again, if I can resource you in any way, we've put all the links in the chat. My team and I would love to connect and keep serving you because I have a mission to change the statistic, right? 31% of US workers engaged in their work is not okay. I deeply want to see that stat changed, but every leader at every level has to believe it matters and is willing to commit to changing it as well. And I think we would see our organizations thrive. I think we would see our broader culture and communities thrive if people are engaged in the work that they're doing in the best hours of their day. And so that's my mission. That's my heart. And I hope that I have equipped you with some good information to get curious, ask more questions, and keep leading well. Thanks so much, friends. And we'll see you all again soon. Thank you.